Okay, so you want to get up to speed on all this XRP action and what's going on with the markets more broadly.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
We've got a ton of info to go through to try and make sense of it all and hopefully cut through the noise.
I think we can definitely pull out some key insights from these sources.
Yeah, so we've got commentary from some pretty big names in this space, right? Tom
Right.
Lee, Avi Leverell, Powell, through YouTube transcripts.
Hmm.
We've also got this detailed analysis of XRP's market position from Glassnode through a Crypto News Australia article.
Right, and then there's this really interesting press release about this new thing in the XRP ecosystem, Exploradex.
Yeah, so think of this as like a deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
cutting through all the noise and getting to what really matters.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start with those new tariffs from President Trump and how the market's reacting to them.
Right.
Then we'll dig into XRP, what its future might look like.
Okay.
And then we'll wrap up by exploring this new development on the XRP ledger.
Sounds good.
All right, so let's jump right in, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so tariffs, big news, right?
Yeah, huge, actually. I mean, Avi Lev in his video, he pointed out that both the stock market and the crypto market took a pretty significant hit right after the announcement.
I saw that, yeah.
And what was particularly interesting was how quickly it all happened. Like, it wasn't just a gradual decline,
Yeah, he was like,
Uh,
boom.
Exactly. It was sharp, it was sudden, and that kind of rapid movement, it often points to, those bigger players making moves.
Well, whales.
Yeah, institutional investors and, all those algorithmic trading systems that react like lightning to anything that could change the game.
Right. They're all about risk management. So
Yeah.
any big news like this, and they're programmed to adjust their positions almost instantly.
Exactly, and then you
Yeah.
get that cascade effect.
So XRP was part of that sell-off too, right?
Oh, yeah. Avi Lev mentioned that it dipped below $2 for a bit, but then managed to bounce back pretty quickly.
It's interesting how resilient it can be sometimes.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, we saw that fear index for crypto. It plummeted. It hit its lowest point since like March 10th or 11th.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
And at the same time, you have the VIX, that stock market volatility index. It's like a fear gauge for the stock market, and it spiked.
So everyone was getting a bit jittery.
Oh, yeah, big time. I mean, uncertainty is like kryptonite for markets.
So looking at the tariffs themselves, it seems like there are a lot of different opinions floating around.
Totally. Avi Lev brought up Bill Amen, who seems to think that countries that jump on board with these tariffs early, and make deals with the U.S., they might actually end up in a better position.
Interesting.
But then you have the EU talking about countermeasures.
Right, it's like a trade war brewing.
It's definitely shaping up to be a very tense situation on the global trade front.
And it's not just governments we're talking about here, right? Aviel also mentioned that even within the U.S., there's pushback from some of Trump's biggest donors and business leaders who are concerned about the potential fallout from these tariffs.
Yeah, they're feeling the heat.
Exactly. It shows how these decisions have very real consequences for businesses and the economy as a whole.
For sure. And, if we zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture, Raoul Pal has this really interesting idea about a re-regionalization of the global economy.
Okay, what does that mean?
So his point is that we're seeing this trend towards countries focusing more on themselves,
Okay.
partly driven by things like these tariffs. They incentivize companies to bring production back home or even force them to.
Right, onshoring.
Yeah, exactly. And Pal believes this shift could lead to inflation down the road.
And that would be because of things like higher labor costs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he brings up General Motors as a good example. They do a lot of their manufacturing in Mexico.
Right.
And if they had to move all that back to the U.S., the labor costs would skyrocket.
And so the big question is, how is all this going to impact corporate earnings?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. Avi Lev talked about a discussion between Tom Lee and Dan Greenhouse, and they were going back and forth on this.
Oh, yeah. What were their takes?
So Lee was actually a bit more optimistic. He thinks that maybe the hit to earnings won't be as bad as some people fear.
Really?
Yeah, he figures that companies might be able to find ways to become more efficient, or they could benefit from changes in currency exchange rates.
Okay, so they'd be able to offset some of those increased costs.
Right. And interestingly, those high-yield credit spreads, they've remained pretty stable, and one-year inflation expectations in the bond market are actually going down.
So market isn't necessarily expecting this huge surge in inflation right now.
Exactly. But then you have the flip side, right?
Which is,
The concern that companies won't be able to just pass on those increased costs to consumers. They might not have enough pricing power.
So their profit margins would get squeezed.
Yeah, but then Lee and Greenhouse threw out another interesting idea. They were talking about how maybe decreases in labor costs, maybe through using more AI and automation,
Yeah.
could actually help to offset some of that pressure on margins.
It's like a balancing act.
It really is. And Greenhouse made a really good point about how the impact of these tariffs is likely to be spread out. It's not just going to hit the companies directly.
Right, it'll ripple through the whole system.
Yeah, it'll also affect their suppliers and, of course, ultimately the people buying the products.
And he thinks that if onshoring ramps up, it could actually be a good thing for U.S. company earnings in the long run.
That's his take.
Interesting. Okay, so last bit of news on the tariff front. Avi Lev mentioned that Treasury Secretary Bessent said that the administration is really focused on the big picture, the overall health of the economy,
Right.
not just what the stock market is doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so they're playing the long game.
It seems that way. All right, well, that was a whirlwind tour of the tariff news. Let's switch gears now and talk about XRP. What do your sources tell us about its market position and its future?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting because you have this contrast between XRP's performance over the past year, which has been phenomenal, and some newer analysis that suggests that its momentum might be slowing down.
Okay.
The Glassnode report that Crypto News Australia covered pointed out that as of the beginning of April this year, XRP was up a whopping 250% compared to a year ago.
That's massive.
Yeah, it's huge. And that's been largely attributed to, the SEC lawsuit finally getting resolved and all the buzz around potential ETFs for XRP.
Right, everyone's anticipating those ETF filings.
Exactly. But Glassnode is also saying that this incredible run might be losing steam. They're calling the current sentiment around XRP fragile.
Fragile.
Yeah, and they're advising caution because they see these increasing speculative risks.
So they're saying it might be getting a bit overheated.
In a way, yeah, they make this really interesting comparison between how XRP's price has moved and how Bitcoin has moved since the lows of 2022.
Right.
They describe Bitcoin's growth as being organic and progressive.
So more steady and sustained.
Exactly, driven by real developments and adoption.
Right.
XRP, on the other hand, it had this sudden spike in late 2024, after kind of just moving sideways for a while.
So it went from 0 to 60.
Exactly, and Glassnode sees that kind of rapid price movement, especially after a period of stagnation, as a sign of retail investors jumping in and speculating.
As opposed to like institutional investors who are more focused on the long term.
Right, and the numbers back that up too. I mean, the sheer number of new XRP addresses is staggering.
How much of an increase were we talking about?
A 490% increase compared to Bitcoin's 10%.
Wow, okay, so a lot of new people are getting to XRP.
Yeah, a ton. And while XRP's realized cap has doubled, that's the total value of all XRP based on the price it last moved at.
Right.
The rate at which new money has been flowing into XRP has slowed down significantly since the end of February.
So that initial FOMO might be fading a bit.
That's what it looks like. And then Glassnode points to this thing they call a top-heavy cost basis among newer XRP investors.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean?
So it means that a lot of these people who recently bought XRP, they bought it at pretty high prices.
So they're in a riskier position if the price drops.
Exactly. They're more likely to panic and sell if things start to go south.
And that could create a snowball effect, driving the price down even further.
Right. And it can also erode confidence in the market, if people start seeing more losses than profits.
Right. They might get spooked and stay away.
Exactly. And based on all of this, Glassnode thinks that we might be seeing a top forming for more speculative assets like XRP.
Which is different from their outlook on Bitcoin.
Right. They see Bitcoin's current pullback as something different.
Okay, so the on-chain data from Glassnode is painting a somewhat cautious picture for XRP. What about the technical analysis we saw in the sources?
Well, FX Empire seems to be echoing that cautious sentiment. They're pointing to a descending triangle formation on XRP's weekly price chart.
Now, for those of us who aren't chart wizards, what does that mean in plain English?
So basically, it's a pattern that's often seen as a bearish signal. It suggests that selling pressure is building up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and if the price breaks below that support level, which is around $1.95 to $2 right now, it could really start to fall.
How far are we talking?
Well, FX Empire is predicting a potential 40% drop towards 1.21 if that support breaks.
Whoa. Okay, that's a big drop.
Yeah, and to add to that, the RSI, that Relative Strength Index, which is a momentum indicator, it's declining, which means buying momentum is weakening.
So the technicals are looking a bit shaky.
Yeah, I'd say so, but we also have Stockmo's perspective from his video.
Right. He seemed to be more bullish in the short term.
Yeah, at least as long as XRP can hold above that 2.02 level.
Right. He said it's tested that level like 9 times recently.
Yeah, and he sees any dip towards that level as a potential buying opportunity. But if it breaks down, he thinks 1.72 could be the next target.
Okay, so there's still hope.
Maybe. And interestingly, his overall outlook for the market in the short term is actually pretty positive, even after this initial sell-off.
Interesting. So we've got these different time frames and different analysis methods leading to different conclusions.
Yeah, it just goes to show how complex this all is.
For sure. Now, FX Empire also mentioned something interesting about long-term XRP holders starting to accumulate again. How does that fit into the picture?
This is a key point. They're saying that these holders who maybe took some profits during that big run up to $3, they're starting to buy back in.
So that's a good sign, right?
Well, not necessarily historically when you see this kind of accumulation by long-term investors. After a big price increase, it often happens right before the market slows down or even corrects.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're drawing parallels to similar patterns in 2018 and 2021.
Okay, so it's like a warning sign.
It could be, during that rally to $3, there was a big drop in the supply of XRP that had been dormant for a long time, which suggests those holders were selling.
Right, they were taking profits.
Exactly. And now that trend has reversed. So that dormant supply is decreasing again because those long-term holders are locking up their coins.
So it's something to watch, for sure.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got this mix of signals for XRP itself. Now let's dive into this new development in the XRP ecosystem, this Explored X.
Yeah, this sounds really cool. Tell us about it.
So they're calling it the first AI-powered decentralized exchange on the XRP ledger.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty ambitious, right?
Yeah, and their token presale is doing incredibly well. They've already raised over 50% of their soft cap in just a few days.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of buzz around it.
So an AI-powered DX on the XRP ledger, what are the big advantages they're touting?
Well, they're really playing up the strengths of the XRPL, the speed, the scalability, the low transaction fees.
Right.
So they're saying that ExploreDex will be able to offer near instant settlement of trades and super low gas costs.
Makes sense.
And they've got this XPL token that's supposed to have a bunch of uses. It gives you access to their AI trading tools. You get reduced trading fees on the exchange, and you get voting rights.
So you can have a say in how the platform develops.
Exactly.
And they're offering some sweet perks to those who get in early during the presale, right?
Oh, yeah, they're going all out with the incentives.
Like what?
So pre-sale participants get staking rewards so they can earn more XPL tokens over time. They get early access to the AI trading tools before everyone else, and they get premium membership features within the platform.
Okay, so they're really trying to reward those early adopters.
For sure, and it seems to be working. They're reporting activity from some big players, what they call whale wallets, and the rate of new wallet connections to the presale is accelerating.
So the hype is real.
It seems that way.
And what kind of features can we expect from ExploreDex once it's fully launched?
They've got some ambitious plans on their roadmap. They're talking about AI-powered cross-asset rebalancing.
Okay, what's that?
So it would automatically adjust your portfolio based on market conditions.
So you don't have to constantly monitor everything.
Exactly. They're also planning sentiment-driven alerts.
So it'll tell you when there's a buying opportunity or when to get out.
Yeah, basically. And they'll also have customizable trading bots.
So you can automate your trading strategies?
Their goal seems to be to bring these really sophisticated DeFi tools to the XRP ledger.
Which is something that some people have said has been lacking.
Right. They're really trying to position ExploreDex as a game changer, moving XRP trading beyond just speculation.
Towards a more data-driven approach.
Exactly. They're saying it's about precision and informed decision-making.
Okay, so it sounds like they're aiming to add some serious utility to the XRP ledger.
And they're also emphasizing that the listing price of XPL on other DXs after the presale will be higher than the presale price.
So another incentive to get in early.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from tariffs to XRP's market position to this exciting new development on the XRP ledger. What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest one is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the air right now. Those tariffs have everyone on edge, and there's a lot of debate about what the long-term consequences will be for the economy.
Right, and with XRP, it's like a tale of two narratives.
Yeah, exactly. On the one hand, you have this phenomenal price performance over the past year, but then you have these recent warning signs from on-chain data and technical analysis that suggest that the rally might be running out of steam.
It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah. And then on top of all that, you have these really interesting developments happening within the XRP ecosystem itself, with XploredX being a prime example.
Which shows that innovation is still happening even if the price action cools down.
Exactly. It's important to remember that the sources we've looked at today, they offer different perspectives and different analyses. And as always in the financial markets, nothing is guaranteed.
Right. It's all about staying informed and doing your own research.
Absolutely.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on, given the potential challenges that XRP might face. Those headwinds that Glassnode and the technical analysts are talking about. How might the emergence of these innovative platforms like XploredX and the overall growth of the XRP ecosystem impact its long-term trajectory? And just as importantly, how might it affect investor sentiment towards XRP?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's something to consider as you navigate this ever-changing landscape.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
See you then.